Hello, my name's TSW, and in this video I will be explaining everything you need to know about the Illidan Storm Rage encounter, the final boss in the Black Temple. He has 6.07 million HP and a 25-minute enrage timer. By far the most difficult challenge is the elemental tanking in Phase 2. You must have 2 fire resist tanks who are confident with their positioning. I'm going to cover each of Illidan's 5 phases and their mechanics. Because of the high quantity of phases and mechanics, feel free to watch this video multiple times or take notes. I don't expect anyone to understand everything straight away, although that is the goal of this video. If you like what you see, please let YouTube's algorithm know by giving this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more classic content. Towards the end of the video, I will cover key takeaways for tanks, healers and DPS, a TLDR if you like. Starting with Phase 1. Illidan dual wields, so hits with both a main hand and a weaker offhand attack. His main hand hits plate for 9k and offhand for 4k. Both main and offhand have a 1.5 second swing speed. Illidan cannot crush. As soon as Illidan begins combat, the damage on the tank is immediate. Healers need to be already pre-casting, and the tank wants ancestral fortitude or inspiration from a priest or shaman. Improved Demo Shout and Thunderclap should also be full time to vastly increase tank survivability. Iron Shield Potion has huge value here to keep the tank alive against the huge physical damage. With appropriate buffs and debuffs, you will reduce Illidan's melee swings to a more manageable 7k main hand and 2.5k offhand. At the start of each phase, Illidan will delay his offhand attack by 0.7 seconds to the middle of his main hand swing. This more evenly distributes his damage. Unfortunately, only until he casts an attack like Shear. After a cast, his main hand and offhand will sync up and both main hand and offhand will strike at once. Shear. Approximately 10 seconds into Phase 1, 3 and 5, Illidan will cast Shear. And then for the rest of the phase with what appears to be about a 12-second cooldown. Shear is a 1.5 second cast on his current target, where Illidan will fly up a little in the air and then swoop down to the tank. This does not affect his hitbox and is purely a visual animation. If Illidan is successful in landing a Shear, the target will get a 7-second debuff which reduces maximum HP by 60%. Without immediate defensive cooldowns, a Shear debuff is an almost guaranteed death of the tank and a wipe. Fortunately, not only can Shear be dodged and parried, but also block. Shear cannot miss, however. I will speak more about Shear in the tanking section towards the end of the video. Flame Crash. This is another 1.5 second cast and should not be confused by the tank as a Shear. Flame Crash is again seen in phases 1, 3 and 5. After the Flame Crash is cast, the tank will take 1000 fire damage and a 10-yard circle of fire will spawn on the target area. This environmental circle of Flame Crash hits for 5k a tick, and after 2 minutes the circle of Flame Crash will despawn. I will speak more about this in the tanking section at the end. Draw Soul. This ability is often overlooked. Another 1.5 second cast that hits for 5000 shadow damage to anyone in front of Illidan in a cone. Anyone hit by the Draw Soul will heal Illidan for 100,000 health. Mortal Strike or Wound Poison reduce the healing received to Illidan, and one of these should be used. Illidan's tank should be the only player in front of Illidan to limit the amount of healing. Parasitic Shadow Fiend. Another easily overlooked mechanic. Roughly every 30 seconds into the fight, Illidan will debuff one player, including possibly the tank, with Parasitic Shadow Fiends. This 10-second debuff ticks for 3k shadow damage every 2 seconds, and upon expiration of the debuff, 2 Parasitic Shadow Fiends spawn. These Shadow Fiends have 3.5k health and will usually be aggroed immediately on a healer due to their healing threat. If the Shadow Fiend melee attacks anyone in the raid, the player will receive their own Parasitic Shadow Fiend debuff, and the cycle repeats. To avoid melee hits from the Shadow Fiends, anyone with the Parasitic Shadow Fiend debuff moves away from the raid when the debuff expires. If your raid is confident and DPS are fast to swap. No slows or frost novas are required. However, placing hunter traps or using Cone of Cold, etc. will increase the duration of the Shadow Fiend's journey to hit a player. Assigning specific players to Shadow Fiend killing duty can be useful and creates accountability. This debuff and DPS on Shadow Fiends cannot be ignored, as they quickly multiply when meleeing the raid. If you are having Shadow Fiends running rampant, they become your primary objective to remove. Congratulations, you've now got through phase 1. Now comes the real test. Upon reaching 65% HP, Illidan will fly up into the air and become unattackable. Dots will remain ticking, so reapply just before 65%. You've now entered phase 2. Illidan will throw down his 2 swords called Blade of Azzinoth. These will spawn a fire elemental at each of them called Flame of Azzinoth, which have 1.1 million HP each and hit with a 1.5 second swing timer for above 11k fire damage. The most important mechanic of phase 2 is that everyone in the raid must be within 25 yards of either Blade of Azzinoth swords on the ground. You need 2 fire resist tanks in order to survive the damage. Petrified Scarab is insanely powerful here. Much like it is on Hydros, the stacks of resistance from the trinket are not removed by the elemental's melee swings. Focusing on killing one of the flames first helps healers massively, and if you're using Petrified Scarab, you'll want to kill within 60 seconds, which is totally achievable. Attack power debuffs such as Demoralizing Shout reduce damage down to about 7k per swing and therefore should be used at all times, as well as the increased time between attacks from Thunderclap. Flame Blast. The frontal cone AoE hits for around 5,000 fire damage most of the time, but can hit up to 7,000 even when a demo shout is applied, which again reduces the damage of this Flame Blast. Flame Blast, like most breaths, does not interrupt the Flame of Azzinoth's melee attack, so expect spike damage whenever the Flame Blast occurs. Blaze. Immediately following the Flame Blast, a blaze appears on the floor, centered on the target of the Flame Blast. Blaze ticks for 7k every second. I-Beam. This is the laser beam blasted down from Illidan whilst he's flying in the sky. There are 2 components to the I-Beam: the laser itself and the trail of fire left behind. The laser deals 30,000 fire damage, and even with a fire resistance tank, it's almost a guaranteed death. Often when a tank is avoiding the I-Beam, the Flame of Azzinoth is no longer attackable from melee due to the trail of I-Beam or blazes on the floor. If this is the case, melee swap to the other ad. The trail of fire from the I-Beam is much less deadly to the fire resist tank and hits for roughly 3k fire damage and can be walked through if needed. It's the laser itself which is the scary part. Fireball. Every 3 seconds roughly, Illidan will throw down a fireball. It has a 2-second cast, but Illidan likes to have a short pause between casts. Fireball hits for around 3.5k damage on a random raider and anyone within 10 yards of that player. The AoE visual gives a great indicator of the range and a reminder to spread out. This is the reason the raid is spread into groups. 3 groups and a 4th being the melee, or 2 groups and the 3rd being the melee both work. The more groups you break your raid into, the less AoE splash damage from Fireball, but more movement may be required. And fewer groups means less movement at the cost of additional splash damage from Fireball. The easiest way to understand how you want to spread is with a top-down view. This is as close to scale as I can create, with pink and blue circles representing 10 yards. Pink is the range and blue is the melee. In the centre of each circle there is a white dot. This represents a tight stack of players. If this white dot intersects with another circle, that's players taking damage from another group's fireball. Let's start with 3 ranged groups and have an even spread, with the melee starting up at the top, with the tank bringing the Flame of Azzinoth to meet them. I can paint in red to indicate where the blaze patches are expected to be, and as the tank moves the Flame of Azzinoth down, the blaze patches will follow, and so will the melee. As you can see, the melee are never getting in range of the 3 range groups. When the first Flame of Azzinoth dies, the melee want to change to the other side. But there is a range group there. Melee can run through the ranged group, but this forces the fire resist tank to be precariously close to the 25-yard range of the Blade of Azzinoth and maybe cause a wipe if the Flame of Azzinoth charges and enrages. It's much safer for the range group and the melee group to simply swap positions. Alternatively, you can just run 2 range groups, having one top and bottom. This means more consistent fireball damage being shared by the raid, but no movement required. Melee are free to run up and down each side as long as the fire resist tank is leaving them room without patches of blaze cutting them off. Dark Barrage. Supposedly, with a 40-second cooldown, Illidan selects a random target and deals 3000 shadow damage per second for 10 seconds. This will kill anyone who isn't immediately spammed with heals. Dark Barrage requires fast heals at the best of times. However, in the middle of phase 2, when fireball damage is being shared with the raid, it's even more critical. There's meant to be a 40-second cooldown, but I never observed it on the PTR, and instead it was only used once in each phase 2. This is something that could easily catch raids off guard if fixed. No combat reses. If a player is combat resed during phase 2, the elementals will charge that player and likely kill them outright if it's not a tank. This charge does not enrage the elementals on the PTR, so save your combat reses until the elementals are both dead. There is a grace period after both elementals die before Illidan flies down and begins phase 3. When both Flames of Azzinoth are dead, phase 3 begins. Phase 3. There is no threat carried over from phase 1. Illidan will fly down in the centre of the circular grate where you killed the Flames of Azzinoth. Healers need to be particularly careful and run out of this area because of the threat reset. A fast misdirection should be used and/or the main tank ready to receive Illidan with a full power bar to immediately build a threat lead. Phase 3 is identical to Phase 1 with the addition of Agonizing Flames. This debuff is applied to a random player and instantly hits them for 5000 fire damage in a 5-yard AoE range centered on that player. Additionally, anyone hit by somebody else's Agonizing Flames AoE will receive their own Agonizing Flames debuff, dealing around 1.2k fire damage every 5 seconds, but increases up to 4.8k at the end of its duration. If spread correctly, only the initial person selected by the 5k AoE damage should get the debuff. Illidan appears to use Agonizing Flames about every 20 seconds, so there will be more than one person with this debuff, but only one of them taking the increased damage towards the end of the debuff's duration at once. For additional context, the final 3 debuff ticks are 4.8k over 15 seconds, so without any healing, any non-tank is expected to die, but the healing requirement is very low. Phase 4. About 60 seconds into phase 3, Illidan will kneel and change into his demon form. With enough DPS, this phase can be skipped altogether if you manage to get him down to 30% to trigger the next phase. If midway through phase 4 you get Illidan to 30% HP, he will return to his normal form and again transition into phase 5. I will speak more regarding how to best skip phase 4 later. So, back to covering phase 4 abilities and mechanics. Phase 4 again lasts about 60 seconds or until he reaches 30% HP. One Warlock in the raid needs shadow resistance to tank Illidan in this phase. While you don't need 365 shadow resistance, which is the cap to tank Illidan in this phase, you do want to keep it relatively high, because of the insane damage dealt from Illidan in the form of his Shadow Blast. Shadow Blast. hits Illidan's target for about 11,000 shadow damage and anyone within 20 yards AoE of its target. Shadow Blast has a 2-second cast, but Illidan pauses a little between each cast. This is the sole reason your Warlock is wearing Shadow Resistance. The highest spike damage on your Warlock tank is between the Shadow Blast casts when he weaves in Flame Burst. Flame Burst. This is cast about 20 seconds into phase 4 and every 20 seconds after. You may get 2 Flame Bursts in phase 4 or you might get 3. Illidan will sometimes cast Flame Burst just as he's ending his demon form, so play it safe with spreading until the phase is over. The reason you want to be spread is because the entire raid is hit by Flame Burst, dealing about 3,500 shadow damage to everyone within a 5-yard AoE splash range. You can stack in pairs of 2 and still survive. Flame Burst isn't deadly by itself, but in combination with any other of Illidan's phase 4 mechanics it can become deadly. Shadow Demons. Almost immediately as Illidan begins attacking in phase 4, hopefully on your Warlock tank, Illidan will spawn 4 Shadow Demons at his feet. These demons will now target a random raid member and paralyze them so they can't do anything. No spells, no movement on these 4 players. There is also a white beam that links the demon to their player, making it easier to identify its target by which demon. These Shadow Demons have 21,000 HP each and need to die before they make their way to the paralyzed target, or the target dies instantly and the demon will select another random target and start again. Melee don't damage Illidan in this phase because of Aura of Dread. I'll speak more about this in a moment. But because melee aren't in melee range, the best thing for them is to stand right at the back of the room, and hopefully 1 or 2 of the Shadow Demons select players at the back of the room, which greatly increases the kill time of those demons, allowing ranged DPS to prioritize Shadow Demons which have selected players much closer to Illidan. You can slow the movement of the Shadow Demons. Frost Trap and Earthbind I can confirm worked on the PTR. Your Warlock tank is the most important person to keep alive in this phase, not only from the Shadow Blast and Flame Burst, but if they are the target of a Shadow Demon, their ability to tank Illidan is totally compromised. What makes it a bit more difficult is because of the 20-yard AoE range of Shadow Burst, ranged DPS need to keep their distance from the Warlock tank whilst killing the Warlock tank's Shadow Demon if selected. Positioning wise, the raid wants to fan out and decide whether or not you want to stack in pairs or not. I would suggest stacking in pairs as it makes nuking these Shadow Demons a little easier at the cost of a little more raid healing. And Shadow Demons tend to be the most deadly mechanic in this phase. Don't neglect positioning DPS away from the Warlock tank, or indeed the opposite side. DPS needs to be spread to kill all Shadow Demons before they reach their target. If the raid is too stacked, even targeting the right Shadow Demon can be difficult. But of course there needs to be DPS in range to kill each of the Shadow Demons, so don't spread out too much. Seed of Corruption can play a big part in killing the demons. The trick being to spam Seed as the Shadow Demons are about to spawn, so when they do, they are immediately hit with Seed straight away. It doesn't really matter if you're losing damage on Illidan, if it means the Shadow Demons are killed off more cleanly. The main goal of phase 4 is keeping everyone alive, and DPS is a nice secondary. Last of all, for phase 4, Aura of Dread. This is the reason melee run away from Illidan. While Demon Form is active, Illidan has this aura which has a 15-yard range and deals 1000 shadow damage per second, while also causing a stacking increase in shadow damage taken by 30%. After about 60 seconds of Demon Form, Illidan will return to phase 3 for another 60 seconds and go back and forth between phases 3 and 4 until you bring him down to 30% HP. 30% HP. At 30% HP, there is a roleplay event with the whole raid unable to do anything and all damage taken stops. This is a great time to regen mana while not casting, and you can expect to regen about a third of your mana for most classes during this downtime. After 30 seconds, the debuff and roleplay end, Illidan becomes active once more, and you have entered Phase 5. Phase 5. Phase 5 is identical to Phase 3 and replaces it after reaching 30% with 2 additional mechanics. Enrage. Illidan almost immediately casts Enrage, which lasts 20 seconds and buffs Illidan, increasing damage dealt by 50% and attack speed by 30%. Even with full debuffs and buffs up, Illidan can hit over 12,000 main hand swings. This is when Nightmare Seed and Last Stand should be used, or Shield Wall. This is the main benefit of bringing a warrior over Paladin to tank Illidan until Enrage is easily survived. Maev's Demon Trap. Maiev, who joins you for the roleplay, will assist you in the fight. Towards the end of Phase 5, soon before Illidan goes back into his demon form to trigger a Phase 4, Maiev will teleport to a semi-random location in the room. She will drop a Demon Trap. This can either be ignored or Illidan kited to the trap. If you're kiting Illidan to the trap, the tank and raid must continue to respect Illidan's mechanics, avoiding shear, avoiding flame crash, killing parasitic shadow fiends, healing agonizing flames, not being in front of Illidan because of the draw soul. A lot can go wrong here. On retail, a fair amount of guilds would therefore ignore the trap and instead opt to just enter another demon phase and kill Illidan there. But let's be honest, we all want to zug and pump Illidan into the ground. So, when Illidan is close to the trap, someone needs to click the trap. This will encase Illidan for about 10 to 15 seconds and increase damage dealt to Illidan by 100%. There is no damage on the tank during this trap. Healers can DPS if they want. You want to start saving 2-minute cooldowns approximately when Illidan reaches 30 to 40% HP to have them ready for the trap. If you don't kill Illidan during the trap, he will exit the trap and go straight into a demon form. Because the demon trap is located fairly randomly, you now have the challenge of dealing with a shadow phase in a new location in the room. The best way I can describe how to adapt is just to copy and paste the regular demon phase assignments relative to where Illidan is now positioned. And that concludes the mechanics and phases of Illidan. However, there is still more to uncover. I'm now going to dive deeper into specific mechanics for tanks, healers and DPS, and focusing on their roles within the raid. The key takeaways as a tank. Shear versus Flame Crash. Both have a 1.5 second cast, and it's imperative that you can clearly distinguish one from the other. It's really helpful if your enemy cast bar clearly has text showing which is being cast. Additionally, you can use the shear animation to help you. You can easily die if you mistime your shield block as a warrior. Phase 1, 3 flame crashes. As seen in the background footage, facing Illidan to one side for the first flame crash, and then front on for the second, and then the opposite side for the third. This means Illidan doesn't move and the melee can stand still, but be careful that nobody is in front because of the draw soul. I would recommend a warrior main tank for the majority of guilds. The warrior must be able to save shield block for the shear. If this can't be done, then swap for a paladin. It's funny that a spell we spam to avoid a crush suddenly becomes deadly to misuse. If you do use shield block at the wrong time, you still have a chance to dodge, parry or even block without shield block up. Avoidance trinkets can be very strong for both the Enrage in Phase 5 or if you do succumb to the sheer debuff. Elemental tanking. This is a very vital point for many players in the video. Petrified Scarab, as mentioned before, has insane value for tanking the fire elementals. The breath and the blaze do remove a stack of the buff, so you will take extra damage towards the end of the 60-second stacking buff from the trinket. Using this trinket can free 2 to 3 fire resistance pieces for something else. Your main priority though is avoiding Eye Beam. This laser will one-shot you. It will one-shot anybody. It's 30,000 damage. You'd rather breathe the raid than die yourself as a tank, because the group that you breath can be CR'd, and if you as the tank is dead, the elemental's going to be killing people and it will lead to a wipe. But ideally, no one gets breathed. You move in good time for the I-beam and everyone survives. You can get unlucky and be cut off from your raid and be forced to stand in a blaze in order to avoid an I-beam. This is fine because the blaze won't be killing you as quickly as the I-beam. However, once the I-beam has been laid and the white-blue fire is on the floor, it does significantly less damage than the I-beam itself. Think about it as being a laser which will one-shot you. The fire itself, left as a trail, does about 3k fire damage and is much less deadly than the laser beam itself. The elementals will enrage and charge, leading to a wipe if anyone in the raid is 25 yards away from either of the blades of Azimuth. These are the swords that Illidan throws on the floor and link to the elementals. If anyone in the raid is 25 yards from either blade, the elementals will charge and lead to a wipe. This includes you as the tank. You can move the elementals quite far from the circular grate. If you're tanking the elemental which dies second, you can start by tanking away from the raid at range, as long as you're within healing range, and start to drop fires known as blaze away from the raid. 5 to 6 blaze patches later, and hopefully the first elemental is now dead, you can bring your elemental closer to the raid and melee can attack. The worst thing to do is to drop blazes close to the raid and create a wall of blazes so melee can't attack once the first elemental is dead. If you are taking 2 dedicated fire resist tanks, remember that you aren't tanking anything else in the fight, so use all of your cooldowns during this phase. Feral fire resist tanks can wear Wolf's Head Helm and still have a great fire resistant set of gear in order to not completely destroy your damage for the rest of the encounter. I'm just going to do a quick playthrough for a very unlucky phase 2. I noticed the I-beam nice and early, which is great as it gives me lots of time to avoid the beam. If this laser beam hits me, I am dead. So fortunately, I see nice and early and I'm able to move out of the way. My priority is staying alive. I don't care if melee can't attack my ad, there's a second ad on the other side that they can attack. 2 blazes later and I'm forced to move out of the way, and I'm sorry melee, but you just can't attack my ad, so they change. I get really unlucky and I'm just squished here. What may have been better is if I just stand in the I-beam, because it does less damage now that it's just fire on the ground. I'm currently stood in 2 blazes, which isn't good. I'm taking a lot of damage, but these healers are able to keep me up. Dragging my mob over here unfortunately puts my ad into melee range of some of the casters and they momentarily pull threat before it dies. Now we go on to the second ad. Key takeaways as a healer. At the start of every phase, the tanks are going to take damage straight away. Precast heals are a must, Power Word Shield is useful as well as fully hotting the tanks. Phase 2 is the most intense. Healing assignments are a must. Stick to your assignments, and if a wipe occurs, look back at the healing assignments and make changes. Healing can get clouded and weak spots difficult to identify when healing is being done on a free-for-all basis. Both elemental tanks can take incredible spike damage when they low roll on their resistance chance, and even more when they are forced to sometimes stand in blaze if cornered off due to an I-beam. And finally, key takeaways as a DPS. I'll start by covering how to skip phase 4. Normally you would be lusting in the elemental phase because that is a very high demanding phase for a lot of your raid, particularly the healers and the tanks. However, if you can get through phase 2 cleanly without using lusts, you want to be using all of your lusts and as many DPS cooldowns as you have in phase 3. If you can get Illidan down to 30% HP in phase 3 within 60 seconds, you will skip phase 4. If you don't quite have enough damage to bring Illidan down to 30%, fear not, you can still nuke him during the transition. Even if he's 35% HP and entering phase 4, you can still just about kill him before he starts one-shotting the raid with his Shadow Blast. Additional things for DPS warriors, you can intervene the sheer cast when used on the tank. This can be useful if you have a feral druid tanking who isn't avoidance capped. Additionally, if the tank misuses their shield block or otherwise could get hit by a sheer, a DPS warrior can intervene and take the sheer. There is a chance that you will be able to cleave and stack the elemental ads in phase 2 for a short period of time, maybe longer if you're doing speedruns further down the road. This is something that I have not explored on the PTR. Melee in particular, make sure that you're not stood in front of the boss at any time because of the draw soul. You will lead to Illidan getting healed a big chunk, 50,000 or maybe even 100,000 if there's not a reduced healing debuff on the boss. If you're using demon traps in phase 5, you want to save as many cooldowns as possible because you're literally doing double damage during the trap, and if you want to pass or just kill the boss, you definitely want to be saving as much as you can. You get the biggest value out of any cooldown there in phase 5, other than if you're using lusts to skip phase 4. And that about covers it. Thanks so much for watching if you've made it to the end. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video. If so, please like for the YouTube algorithm and drop a comment. I'll do my best to answer comments here on YouTube, but I also have a Discord linked in the description if you want to engage further. My Twitch channel will also be linked in the description. I stream as much as I can, normally 3 times a week at the moment. I plan to stream a lot of tier 6. And of course, subscribe here on YouTube and possibly ring the bell if you want to see more YouTube videos in the future. Take care and thanks again.